Canadian of Palestinian descent and origin.
The lecture is beginning.
Okay, we need to repeat.
She was born in Cyprus. They grew up in Lebanon. This is kind of exciting because this is where the world action is now, and we're all involved in it in one way or another. In 1988, she traveled with her sons to Montreal to pursue her master's and doctorate at McGill University. And my gosh, many of you are aware of McGill and the reputation it has worldwide. A very special place. She made Canada her country and became a resident and has her citizenship. She became a citizenship in Canada in 1997. Her dissertation was on philosophy of education. She's had 25 years of teaching. She taught at McGill faculty of College of Education and Higher Education, 1990 to 2001, as well as colleges in Montreal. She holds the Margaret Gillett Award from the Center of Research and Teaching on Women at McGill University 2000, and she has the Helen Prize for Women in 1999 for her community work and academic work. While engaging in her doctoral program and research, she was one of 50 selected researchers who held the most prestigious Quebec government doctoral award for the years 1997, 1998, 1998, and 1999. She is a prolific writer, and it's going to be wonderful to hear from her the very issues that are being faced in the Middle East. She's from Dubai and
Bahrain.
Bahrain, and we look forward to her talk. Right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I struggled while preparing for the Drake lecture. Indeed, there were a few passionate topics that were vying for my attention and my heart. As I ran the gamut of what would be an appropriate choice when addressing a group of fellow educators who were more intelligent, more seasoned, and more eloquent than I settled on that which troubles me the most. On such an important occasion, it is perhaps incumbent on one to prioritize that which is urgent rather than what is fascinating, interesting, or on the cutting edge of research. I chose that which is keeping me awake at night, tossing and turning and wondering. I decided to take Socrates with me and you on this journey. Socrates, a difficult act to follow. The most interesting thing about him is that he never wrote a word, yet he endured. I always imagined him as this short, ugly man. As a feminist, I suppose that I reversed the patriarchal urban legend that his wife was an ugly, controlling woman. And that is why he wandered the streets of Athens and had no desire to go home. He loved to talk, he loved to teach. He took on anyone he saw in front of him in the marketplace and needled people with his questions. The most important thing about the gadfly, I believe, is that he made philosophy accessible to all, as it should be. What are some of the questions that might haunt Socrates were he around today? I think he would be wondering how, after more than 2 millennia, we human beings continue to kill each other with more sophisticated weapons and in more vicious ways, how we have not succeeded in eradicating famine and hunger from the earth, how we have shamelessly created new forms of slavery through child and female trafficking, even though at his time, during his time, there were certain kinds of slavery, but the ones that exist now are not, I don't think are anything he ever imagined would exist. How we have messed up our global environment to the point where we are a few summers away from ice breaking off completely from the Arctic and then melting due to global warming. How drug trafficking continues to be on the increase, and how attempts to fight drug addiction are constantly stifled by growing gangs. Last but not least, how our media outlets engage in sophistry and continue to spew verbal diarrhea most of the time and engage in intelligent discourse only 10% of the time. Indeed, he would be wondering how our young have ceased to look into our faces and into the face of the sun, and how their eyes had become glued to small machines, slaves to the iPod, the iPhone, Facebook, rendering them almost without will, agency, sensitivity, and consciousness. The saddest thing Socrates would be lamenting would be the complete demise of democracy. How those who purport to adhere to it have rendered it lame and ineffective, despite all the intellectual and organizational means at our disposal. He would be thinking that we have completely failed in reshaping the concept of democracy from its elementary forms, where someone like him gave his life for it to be entrenched as a viable concept in political philosophy. How our political system has watered it down to intrigues, machinations, and hackneyed debates on media outlets during campaigns paid by lobbyists rather than meaningful processes that create serious changes in society. We are at the beginning of the 21st century, and what greets us from the most powerful nation in the world, which is supposed to be the leading democracy in the globe, is yet the threat of another war being launched in the Middle East against yet another so-called renegade nation, Iran. As if the war on Iraq has not taught us a lesson. Socrates would be weeping, indeed crying out to our politicians, "You cannot impose democracy on others, you ignoramuses." Instead of a growing democracy, Iraq has been rendered into fragmented sectarian enclaves, waging the most insidious wars against each other, while the oil of the country pours into Halliburton coffers. The late eminent Professor Edward Said spoke about the pressures of professionalism that challenge the intellectual's ingenuity and will in Representations of the Intellectual, published in '94. Said discusses some pressures, none of which are unique to any society in the world. Specialization is the first pressure. I quote, "The higher one goes in the education system today, the more one is limited to a narrow area of knowledge." End of quote. In other words, this pressure leads to losing sight of anything outside of one's immediate field or discipline. This pressure leads intellectuals to swim in the sea of technical formalism. I quote, "Specialization also kills your sense of excitement and discovery, both of which are irreducibly present in the intellectual's makeup." End of quote. The second pressure is expertise and the cult of the certified expert. Said explains, "To be an expert, you have to be certified by the proper authorities. They instruct you in speaking the right language, citing the right authorities, holding down the right territory. This is especially true when sensitive and or profitable areas of knowledge are at stake." None of us are unaware of the industry and special interest lobbies created and maintained by gun manufacturing, oil, and tobacco corporations. The film The Insiders, starring Russell Crowe in 1999, continues to be an authentic reflection of the moral dilemmas an intellectual could face by being in that position. The third pressure of professionalism is, according to Edward Said, and I quote, "The inevitable drift toward power and authority, towards the requirements and prerogatives of power, and towards being directly employed by it." End of quote. Said gives the example of the extent to which the agenda of the national security determined priorities and the mentality of academic research during the period when the US was competing with the Soviet Union for world hegemony. And one can think of similar agendas for the Soviet Union, China, and many other big powers at the apogee of their historical domination in the past and today. Departments of State and Defense provided money not only for science and technology, for example, Stanford and MIT, but to humanities departments and other universities, which were conducting research on anti-guerrilla warfare in support of policy in the Third World, which led to the creation of, and I quote, "international terrorist networks of mercenary states," which Noam Chomsky describes in one of his interviews, and which he says led to the publication out of Oliver North's trial of a massive 42-page document that spelled out the names of these states and ended up focusing on the operations that were going on in Nicaragua.